In the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 32, we have the testimony of John where he said that the way that he would know who the Messiah was that the Lord would send the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit would descend upon the person who he baptizes, and that Spirit would descend on that individual like a dove, and on whom the Spirit rests, that will be the Messiah. That's how John was able to identify Jesus as the Messiah. That was one of the ways that he identified Jesus. His testimony was that the Spirit of God would descend like a dove. Now, this phrase had meaning to the people at this time. It was not an unusual phrase. It was not something that he just kind of made up at that time. He was not talking about an actual dove, a real bird that would fly down and land on Jesus' head. He wasn't talking about that at all. This phrase had distinct meaning to the people at that time. The meaning of this phrase came from Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, we have a description of the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. Now, the word that was used to describe this hovering, this passing over the waters, was a Hebrew word, merachephet. The Hebrew word merachephet is a very unique word in its structure. In its grammatical structure, it describes a passive-intensive type of behavior. And to describe the passive-intensive, well, this is a bit of a challenge because passive and intensive, while being passive, this is unique. The rabbis struggled with this word for a long time. There was a lot of debate over this word as they tried to describe this word and what it would mean and how they could really understand the depth of what was being communicated by the Spirit of God passing over the earth and being upon the earth. What would this really mean, and how could we describe and understand it? And the conclusion to these discussions was that the Spirit of God was on the face of the waters, it was on the earth, in a similar way to how a dove would be standing over or hovering over its eggs, anticipating that they would hatch at any moment. That was how they decided to describe that word, that it would be the behavior of a dove over its eggs, waiting passively, but very intensely, with the expectation, with the anticipation that the eggs would hatch at any moment. So they described the Spirit of God hovering over the earth as a dove would hover over something, hover over the earth. So when John the Baptist used this phrase, that the Spirit of God descended on Jesus like a dove, he was making a direct association with what the Pharisees believed concerning the Spirit of God and how the Spirit of God would descend upon the earth or upon anyone for that matter. He made a very clear association between the Pharisees' beliefs and the proclamation of the Messiah. So there wasn't anything unique about that. It wasn't as if there was an actual dove that flew down and landed on Jesus' head or anything like that. It was just simply a description of how John recognized the Messiah, and he described the descending of the Spirit and the identification of the Messiah in a way that the people would have understood.